Hello everyone, and welcome back to Nocturnal Narrative Studio. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could subscribe to my lovely channel and leave a comment letting me know which country you're listening from around the world. So, without further ado, let's begin the story. I saw the grave open before anyone told me it hadn't. It was early, just past sunrise, when the cemetery is supposed to feel benign, dew on the grass. Birds loud enough to convince you nothing bad could happen in daylight. I was there because my mother was buried in Section J of Northvale Memorial, and grief has a way of turning routine visits into obligations you don't question. The ground near her plot looked wrong. Not sunken, not eroded, peeled back, soil pushed outward in a rough oval, like something had pressed up and then paused. The headstone beside hers had tilted, its base exposed. I stepped closer, already telling myself I was overreacting, when I saw movement, a hand, pale, still. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I stood there long enough to notice details that still wake me up at night. The dirt under the fingernails, the way the wrist bent at an angle that suggested effort rather than collapse. I called 911. The dispatcher didn't ask me to repeat myself. She didn't sound alarmed. She said, "Units are already en route," like she was reading from a script. They arrived in under 5 minutes, 2 police cruisers, a white utility van with no markings, 3 uniformed officers and 1 woman in a gray blazer who didn't wear a badge, but everyone deferred to. Radios crackled constantly, short bursts of code I couldn't follow. Their movements were smooth, efficient, practiced. Too practiced. One officer gently but firmly guided me away from the grave. Another unfolded a tarp and covered the disturbed soil completely, hand and all, before anyone took a photo. "Mom," the woman in the blazer said, voice calm, measured, "can you tell me what you believe you saw?" "I don't believe it," I said. "I saw it." She nodded and wrote something down anyway. Within 20 minutes, the grave was filled in, the headstone reset, the ground smoothed. It looked untouched. One of the officers handed me a printed incident card with a case number already filled in. "Nothing further is required," he said. That was the gaslighting phase, though I didn't have the language for it yet. When I went to the station later that day, the desk sergeant searched the system and frowned. "No record of an incident at Northvale Memorial this morning," he said. "Are you sure about the location?" My phone didn't help me. The photos I'd taken, gone, not deleted. Never there. My call log showed no emergency call that morning. The incident number on the card didn't exist. Over the next week, I requested records. Cemetery maintenance logs had been amended, timestamps adjusted, notes rewritten to describe minor soil settling. A funeral had been added to the schedule at the exact time I'd been alone in Section J. I started digging through archives instead. Newspapers, old police blotters, public records requests. Once you know what phrasing to look for, patterns appear. No abnormal findings, natural causes, case resolved, always near cemeteries, always involving disturbed ground, always closed quickly. The same white van appeared in background photos across decades. The woman in the blazer came to my apartment on a Tuesday evening. She showed a badge through the peephole, held at the precise angle needed to look official without inviting scrutiny. Inside, she stood exactly where she could see both my windows. "You're experiencing stress-related fixation," she said calmly. "Continuing to pursue this narrative will cause complications for you." "What happened to the body?" I asked. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "There was no body. It wasn't a threat. It was procedure." After that, everything I tried failed quietly. Emails bounced. Journalists stopped replying. An online post vanished within minutes, flagged for misinformation. When I tried to leave town, A patrol car followed me for 3 blocks before turning away. I noticed uniforms everywhere after that. Different departments, different insignia, always watching just a little too closely. Radios crackling when I passed. Yesterday, a letter arrived. Official letterhead. Typed language, no return address. Qu'est-ce qu'il a dit read. Below it was the same incident number from the card they'd given me. The one that never existed. The description stated no abnormal findings. Event resolved. Outside my window, I can see the lights of Northvale Memorial through the trees. The ground there has been quiet lately. That's how I know it isn't over. The isolation was written into the contract as a safety measure. That was how they framed it when I accepted the temporary monitoring assignment at Calder's Reach Cemetery. A sprawling, weather-beaten burial ground perched above a floodplain that flooded every few years like clockwork. The forecast called for weeks of heavy rain. Roads in and out would be unreliable. The county didn't want staff rotating in dangerous conditions, so one person would stay on site to log ground movement, marker shifts, and structural stress until the storms passed. One person. No visitors. No relief. It's better if you don't leave once the weather turns, the coordinator told me. Less risk, fewer variables. I told myself it was manageable. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I needed the money, and I liked quiet work. I liked structure. The gate locked behind me with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. At first, everything felt almost comforting. The caretaker's house sat just inside the eastern fence line, solid stone, generator, powered, stocked with food and fuel. I unpacked methodically, hung the provided calendar on the wall, set my watch to the official start time, and opened the personal logbook they'd issued me. Thick paper, numbered pages. Clear instructions on how to document anomalies. Routine arrived quickly, and with it, a false sense of control. Every morning, I walked the same perimeter path, counting steps without meaning to. I checked water levels, measured cracks, photographed headstones that leaned a degree more than the day before. Every afternoon, I reviewed old maps and compared them to what I'd seen. Every evening, I wrote my observations by lantern light while the rain drummed steadily on the roof. Silence became predictable. That's the dangerous part of isolation, when silence starts to feel earned. The first subtle change was my watch. It began losing time in small, irritating increments. 5 minutes here, 3 there. I reset it twice a day until it stopped holding the correction altogether. The wall clock disagreed with it. The calendar felt wrong. I crossed off a day and later found the mark half faded, like I'd hesitated. I blamed stress, fatigue, the monotony. Objects started moving. Nothing dramatic. My flashlight would be on the table when I was sure I'd left it on the shelf. The logbook would be closed when I remembered leaving it open. Once, I found my boots neatly lined up by the door, laces tucked in. I never did that. I laughed it off, talking aloud to an empty room like that made it less empty. "You're just tired," I said more than once. The sounds came next. At night, I heard scraping, slow, deliberate, somewhere beyond the house. I logged it as wind, branches, settling ground. The rain gave me excuses for everything. Cemeteries are generous with explanations if you want them. The mental doubt crept in so gradually I didn't recognize it as doubt at first. I'd read entries in my logbook and feel a moment of disconnect, like I was reading something written by someone with my handwriting, but not my memory. Some notes were clipped and professional. Others were rambling, almost pleading. One entry stopped me cold. "Do not check the western plots after dark." I stared at it for a long time. Why would I write that? By day 9, my watch stopped completely. The generator hummed. The lights stayed on. But time itself felt loose, unreliable. Days stretched too long or snapped shut without warning. I woke from naps convinced hours had passed, only to find the sun unmoved. Other times, Night fell while I was mid-sentence. I started circling dates on the calendar, days that felt heavy, important, though I couldn't explain why. When I checked later, the circles were darker, traced over with pressure I didn't remember applying. That was when I realized I couldn't fully trust my own records. The outside confirmation came quietly. One morning, I found footprints in the mud circling the house. Not animal, too regular, too evenly spaced. They never approached the door, just looped around it, patient and precise. In the logbook, beneath my handwriting, was a new line I didn't remember writing. "It's better if you don't look for it." I told myself that was the breaking point. It wasn't. The breaking point came the night my name was spoken. Not shouted, not whispered, just said, carefully, from somewhere just beyond the window. My own voice, used tentatively, like someone testing how it felt in their mouth. The glass fogged with breath that wasn't mine. I grabbed the flashlight and opened the door. The cemetery stretched out, rain slicked and silent. Headstones stood like sentinels, their shadows wrong, angled toward me no matter where I moved. Then the ground shifted, not collapsing, not erupting, just settling into a pattern that felt intentional. "You don't get to be here," I said aloud, voice shaking. "You don't get to follow me." The response wasn't a sound. It was pressure. Familiarity. The awful sense of being recognized. "You stayed long enough. I don't remember how I got out." Officially, the storm cleared early. Officially, I was extracted for exhaustion and stress-related confusion. They handed me my logbook back with pages missing, dates smoothed over. Everyone spoke gently, carefully, like I might splinter if they didn't. I went home. But sometimes my watch stops for no reason. Sometimes objects in my apartment shift when I'm not looking. And sometimes, late at night, I hear slow footsteps pacing just beyond my bedroom door, careful, patient, like something waiting for me to remember the rules. I've started keeping a new log. It already knows how I write. I should have walked away when the job listing mentioned hazard pay, but not hazards. I'd been unemployed for 4 months, long enough that every email notification made my chest tighten. My savings were gone. My credit card was a quiet threat sitting in my wallet. When the posting appeared, night operations technician, private cemetery, immediate start. I ignored the part of me that flinched at the lack of company name and focused on the hourly rate. It was more than I'd ever made doing legitimate work. Enough to catch up. Enough to breathe again. The interview was conducted in a windowless office behind the cemetery's administrative building. Fluorescent lights buzzed. A woman named Carla slid a contract toward me while maintaining steady, professional eye contact. "It's shift-based," she said. "You follow procedures. You don't freelance solutions, and you don't discuss the work outside the organization." I skimmed the pages. Non-disclosure clauses, behavioral compliance language, penalties that escalated quickly. I signed anyway. The money wasn't worth it, but at the time, money was the only thing I could see. My first day started at dusk. I met my coworkers in the break room, 4 people, all exhausted in the same specific way, not sleepy. Warren, Marcus, who trained new hires, handed me a badge, a radio, and a thick binder labeled after hours protocols. He spoke carefully, like every word cost something. "Most of this is common sense," he said. "Some of it isn't. You'll learn the difference." Initial training was procedural and oddly corporate. Logging patrol times, marking soil movement, checking locks that were never opened. We walked the grounds while Marcus pointed out restricted sections, marked only by subtle changes. Different gravel, older fencing, headstones with no inscriptions. "Don't go past those," he said. Ever. Strange protocols revealed themselves slowly. Don't acknowledge sounds that don't repeat. Don't adjust grave markers after midnight. If you see a light where there shouldn't be one, record it, but don't investigate. If the bell rings, stop moving until it finishes." "Why?" I asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. "Because that's the rule." Coworker warnings came wrapped in normal conversation. A joke about turnover. A glance when a name was mentioned. Someone's locker left untouched for weeks. I noticed a pattern. People didn't quit loudly. They just stopped appearing on schedules. The truth came during my third solo shift. I was assigned to Section E, one of the older areas, tasked with documenting subsidence. The ground there felt wrong, too soft, like it had been recently disturbed despite no records of burials. My radio crackled with my call sign, followed by silence. Then the soil moved, not collapsing, not settling, rising, a shape pressed up from beneath, stretching the earth thin. I watched a hand emerge, fingers flexing as if testing air. I froze. Behind me, Marcus said quietly, "Don't react." That's when I understood what the job really involved. This wasn't maintenance. It was containment. Some graves didn't stay closed. Some things buried with intent remembered that intent. Our role was to keep them documented, delayed, redirected, never stopped. I told Carla I was quitting the next morning. She listened patiently, then pointed to a clause I hadn't read closely enough. They made it clear that early termination constitutes breach, she said, which carries consequences. My badge stopped working outside of scheduled shifts. My final paycheck was withheld pending review. When I didn't show up one night, Marcus appeared at my apartment door, looking genuinely apologetic. "You don't get to leave clean," he said. None of us did. Forced participation changes how you think. You start obeying rules you don't believe in because disobedience feels worse. I rang bells. I logged movements. I learned which sections required more attention and which ones you never acknowledged, no matter what you heard. Escape happened by accident, a regulatory inspection, confusion, a window where no one was watching closely enough. I took it. I'm out now, technically. But I can't work nights anymore. I can't list that job on my resume. My career veered into something smaller, safer, permanently altered. Sometimes I wake up convinced I've missed a shift. Sometimes I hear dirt moving where it shouldn't. I should have walked away. The money wasn't worth it. And whatever I helped keep down there knows my name. I should have known better than to accept the inheritance without questions. When my grandfather Elias died, the family treated it like a closing chapter. He'd been old, withdrawn, living alone for years on the edge of Briarwick Cemetery, a place everyone in town pretended not to notice, even though it sat right behind the elementary school. My mother called him eccentric. My aunt called him difficult. No one called him dangerous. The will named me as the sole inheritor of his property and personal effects. No money, just the house, the shed behind it, and materials pertaining to groundskeeping and historical maintenance. The lawyer avoided my eyes when he read that part. I told myself it was practical. The house was paid off. I could sell it, clear my debts, move on. The signs were all there. Even then, the house smelled wrong the moment I stepped inside. Not rot, not mold, but something mineral and cold, like wet stone kept too long in darkness. Everything was organized to an obsessive degree. Shelves labeled, drawers cataloged, calendars on every wall, dates circled in red ink that had blood through the paper. I spent the first day going through his belongings, expecting the usual relics of an old man's life. Instead, I found maps, dozens of them, all hand-drawn, all depicting Briarwick Cemetery in layers. Not rows or plots, but depth, cross-sections of earth. Notes in the margins about pressure, movement, and settlement tolerance. In the shed, beneath a workbench bolted to the floor, I found jars of soil sealed with wax and labeled with names I recognized from headstones behind the house. Some jars were cracked. Those names were crossed out. The first manifestation happened that night. I woke to the sound of a bell ringing once, deep, resonant, close enough to vibrate the windows. I checked the time, the once and 43 a.m. I told myself it was a memory, a dream bleeding into waking. The cemetery had bells, old ones, rusted. The next morning, dirt appeared on the kitchen floor, leading from the back door to the basement steps. I laughed it off. Old house, animals, my own nerves. If only I had listened to that unease instead of explaining it away. Things escalated slowly, like whatever had been waiting wanted me acclimated before it acted. Doors I locked were open when I returned. Tools I never touched were cleaned and laid out neatly. The calendars changed, new dates circled, others scratched out. I started researching my grandfather. Public records painted him as a volunteer caretaker, same as everyone said. But older town archives told a different story. He was present at every major incident involving Briarwick: sinkholes, missing remains, unexplained ground shifts. Always listed as a consultant. Always the last person to sign off on reports declaring issues resolved. In a false bottom drawer beneath his desk, I found his real journals. They weren't diaries. They were logs. Instructions. Failures noted with shaking handwriting. Successes marked with grim relief. He wrote about inheritance, not of property but of duty. About how the cemetery selects for continuity. About how families close to it eventually produce someone suitable. Me. The activity became undeniable after that. The bell rang nightly, sometimes more than once. The ground behind the house shifted in slow, deliberate patterns. I began hearing my grandfather's voice correcting me when I made mistakes, telling me when to record, when to wait, when to intervene. I tried desperate solutions, burning maps, filling in sinkholes, refusing to ring the bell. Each act of defiance made things worse. Graves sank faster. Shadows gathered near the fence. Names whispered up through the soil, repeating until I wrote them down. One journal entry ended abruptly, written the night before his death. The transfer won't stop it. It never stops it. It only delays collapse. I understand now what he meant. I still live here. I still keep the records. I ring the bell when it tells me to. I've learned which disturbances can be managed and which must be ignored. I don't sleep much anymore. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear I see dirt under my nails that I don't remember digging for. The inheritance wasn't optional. It was inevitable. I said yes because rent was due and pride is expensive. I'd been juggling 2 part-time jobs, neither of them stable, both of them draining me in different ways. My girlfriend at the time, Leah, kept asking how long I thought this phase would last, and I didn't have an answer that didn't sound like an excuse. When an email came through advertising a paid opportunity for on-site historical documentation at a private cemetery, I forwarded it to 3 friends before I finished reading it. Experience, exposure, stipend, lodging included. I wanted to work in preservation and archival research. Cemeteries counted, they had to. The planning phase felt almost fun, like we were pretending to be functional adults. There were 4 of us: me, Leah, my friend Owen from college, and Nora, who Owen had started seeing recently and insisted was chill about weird stuff. We split gas, argued about equipment, joked about ghosts without quite joking. The listing said the cemetery was privately owned and off the main grid, which explained the lack of reviews. That didn't bother us. If anything, it made us feel chosen. Social pressure did the rest. No one wanted to be the one to back out. The cemetery was called Alderreach, and it sat beyond a stretch of forest so dense our phones lost signal before the gravel road even ended. Iron gates stood open when we arrived, which Owen pointed out immediately. "Is that normal?" he asked. Leah shrugged. "Maybe they trust people." That was the first lie we told ourselves. The host, Mr. Harlan, met us near a stone caretaker's lodge that looked older than any of the headstones. He was polite in a distant way, well dressed, soft-spoken. He took our IDs, handed them back, and reminded us that certain sections were closed for safety and respect. "You'll hear bells," he added casually. "They're automatic. Please ignore them." The first day passed easily enough. The atmosphere was quiet, almost serene. Sunlight filtered through tall trees, casting long shadows across the graves. Some headstones were cracked or half sunk, others polished clean. It felt layered, like different eras pressed into the same space. We divided tasks, photographing markers, logging inscriptions, mapping damaged plots. Owen complained about his camera battery. Nora wandered too far ahead and got snapped at by Leah. Normal stuff. But there was an undercurrent I couldn't shake, a sense that we were being observed, not watched exactly, just accounted for. That night, the isolation set in. No signal, no nearby towns, just the lodge and the cemetery stretching out in all directions. The silence was heavier than it should have been, like sound got absorbed before it could travel. We played cards by lantern light, laughed too loudly, tried not to talk about how far away everything felt. The first incident happened just after midnight. A light appeared between the trees, low to the ground and moving slowly, like someone carrying a lantern without a body attached to it. Owen joked that it was Harlan checking on us. Nora didn't laugh. Then a bell rang, not loud, just one deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the floorboards. The light stopped moving. "That's not automatic," Lee said. Escalation came fast after that. Scratching sounds along the lodge walls. Footsteps circling but never approaching. In the morning, one of the stone angels near our work area had turned to face the lodge. We were sure it hadn't been like that before. When we tried to leave to get supplies, the gate was closed. Owen confronted Harlan over the radio they'd given us. Harlan's voice came back calm, measured. "Access is restricted today," he said, "for your safety." That night, a message was carved in the dirt outside the lodge door. "Still you are." Nora broke down. Leah demanded we call the police. Owen wanted to wait until morning. I just wanted to go home. Authorities arrived the next afternoon. 2 officers and Harlan, who spoke for most of the visit. He explained the lights as reflections, the bell as an old timing mechanism, the message as vandalism. They didn't step past the first row of graves. They didn't ask us many questions. We were escorted out at dusk. As we drove away, I looked back and saw Harlan closing the gate, carefully, deliberately. Weeks later, I tried to look up Alderreach. It doesn't exist. No listings, no records, no maps. When I emailed Harlan asking for documentation for my RA Summe, he replied with a single line: "Some places aren't meant to be referenced." I don't argue with that anymore. People always assume something is wrong with us when they hear about the cemetery nights, and I've spent most of my life pushing back against that assumption. We're not reckless. We're not thrill seekers. We're not some backwoods cult playing games with the dead. We're a family that learned early how to take responsibility for a place no one else wanted to understand. If that sounds defensive, it's because I've had to defend it over and over against people who hear the word cemetery and stop listening after that. The tradition started with my grandfather. Officially, he was a volunteer archivist for Greyhaven Burial Grounds, an old cemetery with sections dating back before proper municipal records. Unofficially, he noticed things didn't stay where they were supposed to. Markers shifted. Paths realigned themselves. Graves appeared on no map, then vanished again. He started bringing family members with him after hours, teaching them how to document changes before they became problems. We called it the survey. It wasn't casual. It wasn't a game. There were rules, strict ones, and equipment that had been refined over decades. Each person carried a headlamp with a red light mode, a handheld GPS unit calibrated to local interference, a laminated section map with grease, pencil markings, and a two-way radio with a single shared channel. No phones, no wandering, no improvising. And before anyone asks, yes, it was legal. Greyhaven's board signed off on it years ago, back when they still believed paperwork could control the place. The unusual part wasn't the activity. It was how normal it felt to us. I joined for the first time the year I turned 19. My parents tried to act casual about it, like this was just another family obligation. But I could tell they were watching me closely, waiting to see how I'd react. We met just before midnight, 5 of us that year: my parents, my uncle Rob, my cousin Marin, and me. The rules were explained again, even though I'd heard them my whole life. Stay within your assigned grid. Log anomalies exactly as observed. No interpretation. If the bell rings, stop and wait. If the radio crackles without a call sign, do not answer. If you see someone who isn't part of the group, regroup immediately. The last rule was always said more firmly than the others. Initial participation was almost anticlimactic. Greyhaven at night wasn't scary in the obvious way. The air was cool. The ground smelled like damp stone and leaves. Our lights cast long, controlled shadows. We moved methodically, calling out coordinates, comparing headstones to the map. Strategy mattered. 2 people per grid, overlapping sightlines. Time check-ins every 15 minutes. It felt professional, purposeful. Early encounters were nothing more than wildlife and the occasional odd reading on the GPS. Coordinates drifting, then snapping back. My uncle explained it away quietly, like he always did. Minerals in the soil, he said. Magnetic pockets. I believed him. I wanted to. The first thing that didn't belong was the sound. Not the bell. That was expected, but footsteps that didn't match any of our positions. Slow, deliberate crunching on gravel from a section we hadn't reached yet. I brought it up over the radio, keeping my voice level like I'd been taught. Silence answered. Then my cousin whispered, "Do you see that light?" There was a glow between the headstones ahead of us. Not red, not white, something dim and colorless, like moonlight filtered through fog. But it was moving against the wind, weaving carefully between markers. My father told us to hold position. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. The GPS in my hand vibrated once, then displayed a coordinate that didn't exist on the map. At the same moment, the bell rang. 1 clean toll. Close enough that I felt it in my chest. We stopped. That's when I realized the threat wasn't coming from my family. The presence made itself known not by rushing us, but by following the rules better than we did. It never crossed open ground. It stayed just outside our light range. When we moved, it adjusted, cutting off paths, closing distance without speed. My uncle swore under his breath. I'd never heard him do that. Regroup, my mother said. Now. The chase began the moment Marin tripped. Her scream shattered whatever control we still had. Lights swung wildly. Radios erupted with overlapping voices. The presence reacted instantly, not sprinting, not lunging, but repositioning, herding us away from the main paths and toward older sections we'd never surveyed. I ran because standing still suddenly felt like consent. Gravel tore at my palms when I fell. Something brushed my ankle, cold, damp, leaving a sensation like pressure rather than touch. I kicked free and didn't look back. The rules dissolved into instinct: light forward, breath steady, don't scream again. I crossed the boundary fence without realizing it, slammed into the chain, and rolled onto the access road beyond. The cemetery stopped there. Whatever followed us did not. Aftermath was handled the way our family handles everything: quietly. No police. No reports. No discussion outside the house. We agreed to suspend the surveys, temporarily. A word that tasted like a lie, even as we said it. Equipment was cleaned, recalibrated, stored. No one admitted what they'd seen. Unresolved mysteries have a way of resurfacing. Last week, a laminated map appeared taped to my apartment door. Greyhaven's grid system. My handwriting in the margins. One square was circled. Inside it, written carefully, were 2 words: "Next pass." Looking back, though, I realized the invitation itself was the first betrayal. It came from my cousin Aaron, who had always been the responsible one. The family fixer, the person you trusted with spare keys and hard conversations. He called me in early September, voice light, almost excited, and told me he'd landed a short-term caretaking contract at a historic cemetery outside town. Private grounds, old money, easy pay. He said they needed an extra set of hands for inventory and overnight monitoring, and he thought of me because I was good under pressure. I was flattered. I shouldn't have been. I was between jobs, living off dwindling savings, and the idea of a quiet week away sounded like relief. Aaron assured me it was above board. Permits, contracts, everything legit. He even joked that it would be boring. I'll skip the boring stuff, the drive out there, the small talk, the way the road narrowed until trees pressed in close. What mattered was the cemetery itself. Harridge Estate Burial Grounds sat on a low hill, iron gates open, gravel paths neat and well kept. The caretaker's lodge was warm, stocked, almost cozy, fresh linens, working locks, a kettle already filled. Initial comfort is dangerous because it makes you ignore instincts that don't fit the mood. The first night passed quietly. We ate canned soup, laughed about old family stories, and reviewed the task list left by the property manager. A man named Collins we were told we wouldn't meet unless something went wrong. Inventory markers, log ground conditions, no wandering after midnight. Standard stuff. I slept deeply. The second day, small things began to slip. My phone charger went missing. I knew I'd left it on the bedside table. Aaron suggested I'd packed it wrong. Later, my notebook, the one I'd brought specifically for logging, wasn't where I'd left it on the kitchen counter. It turned up hours later on a shelf I hadn't touched. When I mentioned it, Aaron laughed it off. "Old house," he said. "Stuff shifts." That night, I heard footsteps outside my room, slow, careful. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. Aaron was asleep. The doors were still locked. The authority figures were dismissive by design. When I called Collins the next morning to ask about noises, he spoke calmly, professionally, like he'd said these words many times before. "Ground settling," he said. "You'll hear it more at night." Perfectly normal. Escalating weirdness followed a pattern I only recognize now in hindsight. Mysterious sounds timed just late enough to catch you off guard. The bell near the eastern plots rang once at 3:12 a.m. Though the rope was secured. Dirt appeared on my boots after I hadn't left the lodge. My watch lost time, then gained it back. Aaron started changing too. Subtly. He stayed up later, went out alone, kept a small leather notebook in his jacket pocket at all times. When I asked what he was writing, he said, "Instructions." That word stuck with me. On the fourth night, I woke to whispering. Not voices, voice. Singular familiar. My name, spoken from somewhere below the floorboards. I followed it, heart pounding, to the storage room beneath the lodge. That's when it hit me. The missing items weren't lost. They were taken. Hidden behind a false panel, I found Aaron's notebook. My charger lay beside it. My notebook too, pages torn out and reorganized. Photographs were tucked between the covers, recent ones. Me sleeping. Me walking the paths. Me standing near a grave I didn't remember visiting. The final pages were worse. Names, dates, observations, my habits, my fears, notes about compatibility, and handoff readiness. Beneath it all, a sentence written heavier than the rest: trust ensures compliance. I confronted Aaron immediately. He didn't deny it. He looked relieved, if anything. said the cemetery required intermediaries. Said he'd been doing this for years, helping transition periods go smoothly. He said he hadn't planned for it to be me, but opportunity mattered more than intention. Collins arrived within minutes of my screaming. No surprise, no questions, just quiet efficiency. They blocked the exits, told me I was distressed, that nothing illegal was happening. I ran anyway. I don't remember how I got out, just that I didn't stop until dawn, until the road widened and my phone regained signal. Authorities told me there was no such cemetery on record under that name. No caretaker lodge, no Collins. Aaron is still missing. Last night, I received a text from an unknown number. A photo of my front door. Below it, a message: "You're already documented. Don't make this difficult." I haven't slept since. People always thought our family tradition was strange, and I got used to defending it. We're not morbid, I'd say whenever friends raised their eyebrows. It's historical, respectful. I learned early to say it quickly and confidently, like a reflex. Because once you hesitated, people assumed something was wrong. Every October, my family gathered at Redfield Cemetery after closing hours. Not to vandalize, not to summon anything. We mapped graves. That was the tradition. My grandfather started it decades ago, back when portions of the cemetery were still unrecorded and families complained about lost plots. What began as volunteer documentation turned into something more insular over time. Just us, just nights, just Redfield. We called it the walk. Rules mattered. You didn't wander. You didn't cross into unmarked ground. Everyone carried the same equipment: a handheld GPS unit, a flashlight with a red filter, a printed grid map sealed in plastic, and a small brass tag stamped with a number. You logged every headstone, every sunken patch of soil, every discrepancy. If you heard a bell from the old caretaker tower, you stopped moving until it ended. I should have walked away the first year. I was old enough to participate. But family pressure has a weight that feels like gravity, and I was proud in a way. This was ours. The first time experience was almost peaceful. The cemetery at night felt cooler, quieter, like it had exhaled. We moved in pairs, calling out coordinates in low voices. Strategy was simple: sweep your grid, confirm landmarks, regroup at the Oaknear section H every hour. Early encounters were mundane: rabbits darting through grass, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional owl. My cousin Ely cracked jokes to cut the tension. My aunt corrected my logging format. Everything felt controlled. Then I noticed something that didn't belong. A light far off between rows we hadn't reached yet. Not red filtered like ours. White. Steady. Moving slowly, deliberately, as if following a path only it could see. I whispered about it to Eli. He frowned, scanned the darkness. Probably a reflection, he said, too quickly. The GPS unit in my hand chirped once, then froze. The coordinates blinked and reset to zeros. At the same time, the bell rang. Once, not loud, but close. We stopped, like we were supposed to. That's when I realized the threat wasn't coming from my family. Something moved behind the headstones. Too tall, too smooth, casting shadows that didn't line up with our lights. It wasn't rushing. It didn't need to. It knew the rules. I felt it watching us the way you feel eyes on your back without seeing them. The GPS units across the group began chirping out of sync. One after another, like a countdown. Someone ran. That broke everything. The chase wasn't frantic at first. It didn't have to be. The thing moved with patience, herding rather than pursuing. Flashlights failed. Maps tore. We abandoned grids and rules and formation, scattering through sections we'd been warned about since childhood. I vaulted a low stone wall and felt fingers brush my jacket, cold, damp, leaving a smear of soil that burned against my skin. I didn't look back. I followed the only light that still worked, lungs screaming, heart trying to escape my ribs. I made it out because I tripped over the boundary chain and rolled through the gate. The cemetery didn't follow past that point. The aftermath was quiet, too quiet. My family refused to talk about it. Said it was a trespasser. Said we'd imagined things. Said stress makes shadows move. The walk was canceled, indefinitely, but the equipment was never thrown away. It was cleaned, repacked, stored. Last week, a brass tag appeared on my doorstep, stamped with a number that doesn't exist on any of our maps. On the back, scratched deep into the metal, was a single word, Fuyuende. I took the opportunity because I couldn't afford not to. I was drowning. Student loans, a maxed-out credit card, a lease I couldn't break without penalties. When my friend Jenna sent the link to a paid, immersive historical documentation project at a privately owned cemetery, I barely read the fine print. 2 weeks on site, lodging included, stipend at the end. Experience with archival work preferred, but not required. It sounded like a stepping stone. A way out. The cemetery was called Black Hollow Memorial Grounds, tucked deep in a rural stretch that barely registered on GPS. The owner, listed only as Mr. Calder, communicated through short, formal emails. No phone calls, no video. Just instructions, schedules, and a reminder that discretion was non-negotiable. There were 5 of us in the group, Jenna and me, a couple named Ryan and Elise who were clearly on the brink of breaking up, but pretending this trip would fix things. And Marcus, quiet, older than the rest of us, who said he needed the money for reasons. Planning felt normal enough. We argued about packing lists, about whether the stipend would be taxed, about who got which room. Social pressure did the rest. I didn't want to be the one to back out and look flaky. Everyone else seemed confident. We arrived just before sunset. Black Hollow was enormous, far larger than any cemetery had a right to be. Iron gates stood open as if expecting us. The headstones were old, many unmarked, others carved with symbols instead of names. The caretaker's lodge, a squat stone building near the center, was where we were meant to stay. The atmosphere wasn't immediately hostile, just watchful. First day tasks were simple photograph plots, log damage, note unusual features. Mr. Calder met us briefly, a tall man in a dark coat despite the heat. He didn't shake hands, didn't smile. Stay within the marked sections, he said. If you hear bells, ignore them. If you see lights, do not follow. Then he left. Tension built in the small ways it always does when people are tired and uncomfortable. Ryan complained about the lack of cell service. Elise accused him of flirting with Jenna. Marcus wandered off alone more than once, insisting he was just thinking. That night, we saw the lights, small, pale orbs drifting between the headstones, low to the ground, moving with purpose. Jenna thought they were lanterns. Ryan joked about ghost tours. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The first incident happened around 2 a.m. A bell rang. Once. Deep and resonant, like it came from underground. The lodge shook. Outside, one of the lights slammed violently into a mausoleum door, denting the metal. By morning, that door was gone. Escalation followed fast. Fresh soil appeared where we'd documented intact graves. Our equipment malfunctioned, photos corrupted, audio files filled with whispering. Someone scratched "Stay into the dirt outside our door. We tried to leave. The gate was locked. Authorities arrived late that afternoon after Jenna managed to get a signal. 2 county officers and Mr. Calder, who spoke for most of the visit. Calm, polite, reassuring. He explained the damage as vandalism, the bell as a historic artifact settling. They didn't step past the first row of graves. We were escorted out at dusk, no statements taken, no copies of our reports returned. As we drove away, I looked back. Mr. Calder was already closing the gate, expression unreadable. Weeks later, when I tried to look up Black Hollow again, it wasn't there. No listing, no records, just a blank stretch of land on the map. The stipend arrived anyway, in cash, no return address. And sometimes, when I'm trying to sleep, I hear a bell, distant, patient, like it's reminding me that I was never supposed to leave. I should have known better than to accept the keys. They were old, heavy, tied together with a strip of black ribbon that smelled faintly of iron and damp paper. The lawyer slid them across the desk after reading my Aunt Eleanor's will in a voice so flat it felt rehearsed. House, contents, and adjacent grounds, it said. No further explanation. No other heirs, just me. Eleanor had been the quiet one in the family. The one who never married, never left town, never talked about her work beyond saying it was important and local. She lived beside Marrow's End Cemetery, a private burial ground older than the county itself. Growing up, we were told not to bother her with questions, not to wander near the fence, not to mention the bells. If only I had listened. The house was exactly as I remembered it, narrow, tall, pressed right up against the cemetery's eastern boundary. The windows on that side were permanently shuttered. Inside, everything smelled like dust and old books. Eleanor hadn't modernized anything. No internet. No television. Just shelves and cabinets and locked drawers. I spent the first day sorting through her belongings, telling myself I was just being practical. Deeds, letters, photo albums that stopped abruptly in the 1970s. Beneath the stairs, I found boxes labeled in Eleanor's precise handwriting. Records, maintenance, intake. That should have been my warning. Inside were cemetery maps, far more detailed than any public version, showing plots that didn't exist on official records. There were notebooks filled with dates, symbols, and repeated phrases written over and over like practice. Bells drawn in the margins. Soil samples sealed in envelopes and labeled with names. That night, the first manifestation occurred. I heard the bell. Not loud, not close. Just a single, dull toll that seemed to come from underground rather than above it. I checked the time, 2:17 a.m., and told myself it was imagination, a memory resurfacing now that I was back. The signs were all there, but I dismissed them one by one. Doors left open that I was sure I'd closed. Dirt tracked across the kitchen floor leading nowhere. A calendar on the wall with certain dates circled so heavily the paper tore. When I crossed one out, the mark returned darker the next day. Research came next, driven by unease I couldn't explain. Town records painted Eleanor as a volunteer caretaker, nothing more. But older archives told a different story. She'd been present at every major incident involving the cemetery. Collapses, missing persons, unexplained disturbances, always listed as a local authority. In the basement, behind a false wall, I found her real work, shelves of ledgers, manuals written by hand, contracts signed by names that appeared on headstones outside. Eleanor hadn't just watched over the cemetery. She'd been responsible for keeping it contained. The activity escalated quickly after that. The bell rang nightly, sometimes twice, sometimes not at all. Shadows gathered near the fence, pressing inward. My dreams filled with instructions spoken in Eleanor's voice, correcting my mistakes, reminding me of timings I didn't remember learning. I tried desperate solutions, burning pages, locking gates, ignoring the bell. Each attempt made things worse. The ground shifted, names whispered from beneath the soil. I found fresh earth on my pillow. One ledger ended abruptly with a final entry, written shakily. Legacy transfer successful. New custodian informed. I understand now what I inherited wasn't property. It was responsibility. I still live here. I ring the bell when I'm told to. I keep the records updated. The cemetery has been quiet lately, which terrifies me more than the noise ever did. Some nights, I swear I hear Eleanor standing behind me, approving. The curse doesn't end. It only changes hands. I should have walked away when the job listing didn't name the company. I was 3 months behind on rent, My savings gone, my inbox full of rejection emails that all said the same thing in slightly different fonts. When the posting appeared, overnight grounds operations assistant, immediate start, housing stipend, hazard pay. I clicked before thinking. The address led to a cemetery on the outskirts of town, one I knew by reputation only. Old, full, quiet in a way people pretended was peaceful. The interview was short. Too short. A man in a pressed gray suit slid a contract across the desk without looking at me. He didn't ask about my experience, only whether I could follow procedures and keep my mouth shut. When I hesitated at a clause about non-disclosure extending beyond termination, he smiled thinly. "Everyone signs," he said. "Turnover's high." The money was more than I'd made anywhere else. The housing stipend alone could reset my life. The money wasn't worth it, but I didn't know that yet. My first day started at dusk. I was issued a badge, a radio, a heavy flashlight, and a spiral-bound manual labeled Night Operations Protocol. The cover was worn, pages swollen from moisture, like it had been handled underground. The supervisor, Lena, walked me through the grounds with brisk efficiency. "You'll work in pairs for the first week," she said. "After that, it depends." "Depends on what?" She checked her watch. "Compliance." The coworkers were normal enough at first. Tired, polite. Everyone avoided eye contact just a little too deliberately. In the break room, conversations died when I entered. A guy named Marcus showed me how to log inspections, how to note soil movement, how to phrase things so reports wouldn't get flagged. "What happens if they do?" I asked. He paused. "They come back." I thought he meant paperwork. Training focused less on safety and more on timing. When to patrol certain sections, when not to. Which paths were closed permanently, but still appeared on our maps. We were told never to enter the lower mausoleum levels alone. Never to respond to voices on the radio unless Lena confirmed the call sign. Never to stay past the end of shift, even if something was unfinished. "Especially then," Lena said. The protocols got stranger the deeper I read. Don't step on fresh soil without marking it first. Don't acknowledge movement in peripheral vision. If you see a grave marker that wasn't there before, note it and move on. Do not touch it. Coworker warnings came in pieces. Marcus told me not to get attached to routines. A woman named Tessa quit mid-shift on my third night, left her badge on the desk, boots by the door. No one mentioned her again. When I asked, Lena said she wasn't a good fit. The truth found me before I went looking for it. It was during a late patrol in Section D, one of the restricted areas I wasn't supposed to enter yet. My radio crackled with my own call sign, distorted. Lena's voice told me to check a report of ground agitation. The phrase wasn't in the manual. I followed the sound to a sunken plot where the earth was breathing. I don't have a better word for it. Rising and falling, slow and deliberate. A hand pushed up through the soil, then sank back down like it was testing the surface. I froze. Behind me, Marcus whispered, "Don't react," he told me later, after the ground stilled, that this was the job. Not maintenance. Not security, containment. Some graves didn't stay settled. Some things buried with intent remembered that intent. They made it clear that quitting isn't really an option once you've seen it, he said, eyes fixed on the dirt. "You're already part of the record." I tried to quit anyway. HR reminded me of my contract, of penalties, of clauses about psychological contamination. My badge stopped opening the main gate. My housing stipend was frozen. My car wouldn't start unless I was on shift. They reassigned me to solo nights. Forced participation changes you. You start following rules that horrify you because breaking them feels worse. I logged disturbances. I rang bells I wasn't told the purpose of. I learned which graves needed more attention and which ones needed to be ignored. Escape came suddenly. A fire inspection. External oversight. Confusion. I ran when no one was watching. I got out. But my career is over. I can't work nights anymore. I can't stand silence. Employers ask about the gap in my RA sum A, and I lie so badly they know it's a lie. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear soil shifting. Sometimes, I check my hands for dirt that isn't there. I should have walked away. The contract said isolation was temporary and necessary. That was the phrase they kept using. Temporary and necessary. As if repeating it enough times could sand down the unease that crawled up my spine every time I read it. Hawthorne Cemetery had suffered storm damage in its oldest section, a sinkhole collapse that exposed graves too unstable for public access. My job was to stay on site for 2 weeks, documenting ground shifts, monitoring markers, and logging any environmental anomalies until engineers could arrive. No visitors, no staff rotation, just me, a small maintenance cottage inside the cemetery fence, and a list of rules printed in tidy, official language. Weather was the excuse. Heavy rains forecasted. Roads possibly impassable. Communications limited. You'll be safer staying put, the supervisor told me, smiling too quickly. Everything you need is already there. The gate locked behind me with a finality I felt in my teeth. At first, it really did feel manageable. The cottage was small but clean. Generator worked. Shelves stocked. A desk by the window overlooked rows of headstones, softened by moss and fog. I set my watch, hung the calendar they'd provided, and opened the official logbook, thick-lined, already labeled with dates. Routine settled in like a blanket. Every morning I checked the perimeter, measured cracks in the soil, noted moisture levels. Every afternoon I reviewed maps and compared them to the ground. Every evening I logged sounds, wind through trees, animals moving, the distant creak of old stone. Silence became normal. That was the false safety of it. Silence feels like control when nothing has gone wrong yet. The first subtle change was time. My watch started losing minutes, not hours, just enough to be irritating. I'd reset it, only to find it drifting again. The wall clock disagreed with it. The calendar felt off too. I'd cross off a day, and later see the mark faint, like I'd hesitated. I blamed fatigue. Then objects began to move. Nothing dramatic. My flashlight would be on the left side of the desk, instead of the right. The logbook would be closed when I was sure I'd left it open. Once, I found my boots lined up neatly by the door, laces tucked in. I never did that. I started writing more detailed notes, not just about the cemetery, but about myself. Day 6. Slept poorly. Heard scraping around 20:10 a.m., probably branches. The sounds were easy to rationalize: wind, settling earth, animals. A cemetery offers endless explanations if you want them. The mental doubt crept in slowly, like fog rolling uphill. I'd read a log entry and not remember writing it. Or I'd remember doing something and find no record of it. The handwriting stayed consistent, mine unmistakably, but the tone shifted. Some entries were clipped and professional. Others were rambling, almost frantic. Stop checking the west plots after dark. I stared at that line for a long time. Why would I write that? On day 9, my watch stopped entirely. The generator hummed. The lights stayed on. But time itself felt loose. Days stretched or snapped shut without warning. I woke from naps convinced hours had passed, only to find the sun unmoved. Other times, night fell while I was mid-sentence. I circled dates on the calendar that felt important, though I couldn't explain why. When I checked later, the circles had been filled in, darkened, like someone had traced them harder. I laughed out loud then, sharp and unpleasant. Get a grip, I told the empty room. That was when I heard something answer. Not words, just a sound, soft, deliberate, coming from outside the cottage. A single footstep on gravel. I froze. No one was supposed to be there. I checked the perimeter the next morning and found confirmation that something external was interacting with the environment. Footprints. Not animal. Too regular. Too measured. They circled the cottage but never approached the door. In the logbook beneath my neat handwriting, it was a new line. It's better if you don't look for it. The breaking point came that night. I woke to the sound of my name being spoken just outside the window. My own voice, used carefully, like someone testing it. The glass fogged with breath that wasn't mine. I grabbed the flashlight and opened the door. The cemetery stretched out, headstones standing like witnesses. Silence pressed in from all sides. Then the ground shifted, not collapsing, not erupting, just settling into a shape that felt intentional. I screamed at it, at the dark, at whatever had been watching me mark time like it mattered. "You don't get to be here," I said, voice cracking. "You don't get to follow me." The answer came from everywhere at once. A pressure in my ears. A familiarity that hurt. "You stayed long enough. I don't remember how I got out." Officially, the storm cleared early. Officially, I was evacuated for exhaustion. They handed me my logbook back with certain pages missing, dates smoothed over. Everyone spoke gently, like I might shatter. I went home. But sometimes my watch stops for no reason. Sometimes objects in my apartment shift when I'm not looking. And sometimes, late at night, I hear footsteps pacing just beyond my bedroom door. Careful, patient. I've started keeping a new log. It's already been written in. I saw the body before the police did, and that fact alone made everything that followed feel prearranged. It was just after dawn, the hour when Hawthorne Cemetery looked least like itself. Fog lifting, birds testing the air, the world pretending the night hadn't happened. I was there early because my father was buried in Section F, near the old sink-prone plots that required frequent inspections. I brought coffee, flowers, and a folded program from his funeral I still hadn't thrown away. I noticed the disturbed ground first. Not a collapse, not erosion, something recent, purposeful. The soil around one grave had been pushed outward, as if from below. The headstone leaned at an angle I hadn't seen the day before. Then I saw the hand. It was gray, stiff, fingers curled into the dirt like they'd tried to pull themselves free. No sleeve. No jewelry. Just skin stretched too tight over bone. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for it to make sense. Waiting for it to move. It didn't. I called 911 with shaking hands, stumbling over my words. I said, "Cemetery," 3 times. I said, "Grave," and "Someone is down there." The dispatcher's voice stayed calm, flat, almost bored. "Units are already en route," she said. That should have been impossible. They arrived in under 5 minutes. 2 police cruisers, a white van with no markings, and a pair of uniformed officers I didn't recognize. Their movements were smooth, practiced, like they'd rehearsed this exact spacing between vehicles. No sirens, no urgency. One officer gently guided me away from the grave, while another draped a tarp over the exposed soil, covering the hand completely. "Mom," the first one said, checking his badge like it mattered. "Can you tell me what you think you saw?" I corrected him. "I didn't think I saw it. I saw it." He nodded as he wrote something down. Of course. They didn't ask for my phone. They didn't photograph the scene. One of them spoke quietly into a radio, using codes I didn't recognize, his tone casual, almost friendly. Within 15 minutes, the ground was filled back in. The headstone reset, the tarp gone. It was like the grave had never been disturbed at all. "We're all set here," a woman in a dark blazer said, stepping forward. No uniform, but everyone deferred to her. There was a minor soil shift. "You misinterpreted what you saw." "There was a hand?" I said. "You covered it." She smiled sympathetically. "Grief can cause misperceptions." I demanded a report number. She handed me a card already printed with one. When I checked it later, it didn't exist. Over the next few days, everything unraveled quietly. The photos I'd taken on my phone were gone, not deleted, just never there. The call log showed no 911 call that morning. When I went to the station to follow up, the desk officer searched their system and frowned. No incident at Hawthorne Cemetery on that date, he said. Are you sure you have the right day? I requested public records. The cemetery maintenance logs for that week had been amended. Soil inspection notes rewritten, timestamps adjusted. A funeral was listed at the exact hour I'd been there alone. I started digging through old archives, newspapers on microfilm, scanned police blotters. It took time, but patterns emerged. Collapses reported and then retracted. Missing persons last seen near burial grounds. Each case marked resolved, natural causes, or no further action required. Different years. Same phrasing. The same white van appeared in a few background photos, always unmarked. A week later, the woman in the blazer visited my apartment. She didn't knock. She showed a badge through the peephole, held at the exact angle required to be convincing. We need to clarify some misunderstandings, she said once inside. Her voice was calm, rehearsed, every word placed carefully. You witnessed a natural phenomenon. Your continued insistence otherwise is creating unnecessary complications. You altered records, I said. You're hiding something. She leaned closer. What you saw does not stay contained unless managed. It wasn't a threat, it was policy. After that, my attempts to expose it went nowhere. Emails bounced. Journalists stopped responding. A post I made online vanished within minutes, flagged for misinformation. When I tried to leave town, my car wouldn't start. When it did, a cruiser followed me for 3 blocks before turning away. I began noticing uniforms everywhere. Different departments, different insignia, all watching just a little too closely. Yesterday, a letter arrived in my mailbox, official seal, typed language, no return address. Casey Saloseed. It read. Below it was the incident number from the card they'd given me. The one that didn't exist. The description read, no abnormal findings. Event resolved. Outside I can hear radios crackling near the cemetery fence. The ground has been quiet lately. That worries me more than anything. I hired Elias because everyone said he was the safest way to see Hawthorne Cemetery after dark. That should have been the first warning. The idea that safety could be rented in a place built entirely around permanence and loss. But I was researching local burial practices for a long-form article, and Hawthorne's older sections were closed to the public after sunset. Elias had permits, keys, and stories. He had a laminated badge, a calm voice on the phone, and a website full of testimonials that all used the same phrase, he knows the cemetery like it knows itself. On the night we met, he handed me a printed map of the grounds, folded and creased from use. Sections were color-coded, paths clearly marked. He gave me a flashlight with fresh batteries and showed me the radio clipped to his belt. Stay where I tell you, he said with a reassuring smile. Follow the rules and nothing surprises you. He explained the rules easily, like muscle memory. Don't cross the iron markers after dusk. Don't step on grave borders. If you hear someone call your name, check the radio before answering. If the light flickers, tap it twice. Not once, twice. He told stories as we walked, about famous burials, odd epitaphs, how the cemetery expanded in layers rather than rows. His confidence was comforting. He laughed at the right moments, waited when I stopped to take notes, corrected himself when he misspoke. I trusted him without effort. The first deviation was almost charming. We reached a path marked closed on the map, an older section where the headstones leaned inward like conspirators. Elias paused, glanced around, then stepped over the chain barrier. Shortcut, he said. The map's outdated. I hesitated. I thought you said. I did, he replied gently. For visitors. You're with me. He broke his own rule about stepping between markers too, just once, boots crunching softly on gravel that hadn't been disturbed in years. When I pointed it out, he smiled. "Rules flex," he said. "Context matters." The cemetery felt different there. Quieter, but not empty. My flashlight beam seemed to bend, shadows stretching where they shouldn't. Elias walked a little faster, his voice lower now, more focused. He began asking questions that didn't feel like small talk. Who knew I was here? What time I planned to leave? Whether I trusted people easily. He corrected my notes when I misread a name on a headstone before I'd said it out loud. "Lucky guess," he said when I stared. As we moved deeper, he started positioning himself between me and the paths, subtly guiding my steps with gestures rather than words. When my radio crackled once, he reached out and turned it off. "Interference," he said. "It happens. Shouldn't we? Trust me." The flashlight he'd given me began to dim. I tapped it twice, like he'd taught me. Elias watched closely, his expression unreadable. "Good," he murmured. "You're learning." The moment of doubt came when he led me to a family plot that wasn't on the map. No markers, just disturbed earth and a single stone slab etched with symbols that made my eyes ache. Elias knelt and brushed dirt away with reverence. "They don't put this in the brochures," he said. I asked him how long he'd been doing this. He smiled without looking at me. "Longer than you think." I checked my phone, no signal. The radio crackled again, this time with a voice beneath the static. Breathing. Slow. Expectant. Elias turned it off again, sharper now. "Not yet." That's when I realized the map he'd given me didn't match the paths behind us. The turns were wrong. Sections repeated. We'd been walking in circles that spiraled inward, not outward. "You said stay where you tell me," I said. "Why?" He stood and finally faced me fully. In the flashlight's weak glow, his eyes reflected too much light. "Because wandering attracts attention," he said. "And you were never the audience." The revelation wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and inevitable, like realizing the ground has been sloping downward for miles. Elias wasn't guiding me through the cemetery. He was delivering me to it. He admitted it calmly when I confronted him. Said the cemetery needed intermediaries. Voices it trusted, hands it recognized. Guides who learned the rules so others wouldn't have to. He said some people leave footprints, some leave names, and some stay to help choose. "You'll make a good marker," he told me. "You ask the right questions." I ran when the ground shifted beneath us, when something moved under the soil with purpose. I dropped the map, the flashlight, the radio. I didn't follow paths. I followed panic. I made it out because something else distracted him. Because the cemetery is never hungry for just one thing. Weeks later, safe and far away, I tried to convince myself it was over. Then I saw his face on my screen. A new advertisement, different town, different cemetery, night tours available, expert guide, safety guaranteed. Elias smiled from the photo, badge gleaming, map folded just so in his hands. And beneath it, the same phrase. He knows the cemetery like it knows itself. I never questioned the cemetery bell because everyone told me not to. It was part of the job. That's what they said when I took the groundskeeping assistant position at Briar Hollow Cemetery, the oldest burial ground in our county and the only one still using manual upkeep for certain traditions. The bell stood near the central path, mounted on a black iron post, its surface worn smooth by hands that no one remembered belonging to anyone specific. Every morning at dawn, someone rang it once. Every evening at dusk, someone rang it twice. That someone became me. At first, the routine felt grounding. I arrived just before sunrise, fog pooling low between the headstones, the air smelling of wet stone and old leaves. I'd walk the same gravel path, count my steps without meaning, to unlock the maintenance shed, then crossed to the bell. One pull. Not too hard. Let it ring fully. Don't rush it. Let it finish, my supervisor, Tom, had said casually on my first day. It doesn't like being interrupted. I laughed then. He didn't. After the bell, I swept fallen leaves from the older graves, checked for sinkholes, reset flowers knocked over by animals or wind. At dusk, I returned for the second ringing. 2 pulls, same pressure, same pause between them. The sound traveled differently in the evening, lower, heavier, like it sank into the ground instead of drifting away. No one explained why. No one needed to. It was just how things were done. The learning phase was subtle, folded into normal instructions the way habits are passed down without ceremony. Don't step between the 3rd and 4th row in section C after noon. Always greet the grounds aloud when you arrive. If you hear the bell echo back, wait until it stops before moving. Echo back, I asked once. Tom shrugged. You'll know. There were phrases too, things people said without thinking. Still breathing. Instead of, good morning, all settled. Instead of, how's work? When I asked about it, I was told it was gallows humor. Cemetery people had their quirks. I picked them up without realizing. Every morning, as I reached the bell, I found myself whispering, I'm here. Every evening, after the second ring faded, I said, that's enough for today. I don't remember choosing those words. They just fit. The motions mattered too. Left hand on the rope, right hand steadying the post. Step back after ringing, never forward. Nod once before turning away. If I forgot, my body corrected itself, a small jolt of wrongness snapping me back into place. The repetition was comforting, until it wasn't. I started noticing dates. Certain days felt heavier. The bell rang longer, even when I pulled the rope the same way. The air pressed close, sounds muffled like cotton stuffed in my ears. On those days, the cemetery logs showed more visitors, more funerals scheduled years ago, clustering around specific times. I checked a calendar one afternoon and felt my stomach drop. The heavy days lined up with old death anniversaries. Mass ones, a factory collapse, a flu outbreak, a train derailment I'd only ever seen referenced in yellowed newspapers. The bell rang hardest on those days, vibrating through my arms long after I let go. I asked Tom if that was normal. He looked tired suddenly. The ground remembers, he said. We help it keep track. That night I stayed late and searched the archives room beneath the office. Burial maps, maintenance notes, handwritten ledgers dating back over a century. The bell appeared everywhere, not as an object, but as a verb. Rang at proper hour, rang to keep balance, rang so they stayed settled. One entry caught my eye, written in a cramped hand. Routine maintained. Hunger delayed. I laughed out loud, the sound echoing too sharply in the low, ceilinged room. Hunger. Sure. Just metaphor. Old superstition wrapped in duty. But once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee the patterns. The phrases we used matched old prayers, stripped of their meaning, but not their structure. The gestures mirrored symbols, etched faintly into headstones I'd cleaned 100 times without noticing. The timings, dawn and dusk, anniversaries, seasonal shifts, formed a rhythm too deliberate to be accidental. The routine wasn't about respect. It was feeding something. The realization came one morning when I overslept. I rushed through the gates, heart pounding, sunlight already creeping over the tree line. I reached the bell late, by maybe 10 minutes, and pulled the rope harder than usual, breathless and annoyed with myself. The sound that came back wasn't an echo. It was a response. The ground shuddered under my feet, just enough to feel, not enough to see. Dirt slid softly against stone. From somewhere deep below, there was a sound like a throat clearing, like something waking up displeased. I didn't finish the ring, I ran. By noon, sinkholes had opened in 3 sections. A mausoleum door hung ajar, its hinges twisted. Tom found me sitting in the shed, shaking. "You didn't let it finish," he said quietly. I told him I was done, that the bell was wrong, that we were doing something we shouldn't. He looked at me with something like pity. "It's already been done," he said, "would just keep it from getting worse." I refused to ring it that evening. The retaliation was immediate. The sky darkened too fast, clouds rolling in like bruises. Visitors panicked as wind tore through the cemetery, knocking over flowers, snapping branches. The bell began to sway on its own, rope twitching like a living thing. From beneath the ground came a sound of pressure building, a groan that vibrated through my bones. Names whispered up through the soil. Some I recognized from headstones, some I didn't. My own name threaded through them, testing its shape. Tom grabbed my arm. "Ring it," he shouted over the noise. "Now," I pulled. Twice. The sound settled into the earth like a command. The wind died. The ground stilled. People emerged from hiding, confused, insisting nothing unusual had happened. That night, Tom was gone. His locker was empty, his name scratched off the schedule. When I asked where he'd gone, they told me he'd retired years ago. That I must be misremembering. I tried to stop the routine after that. I really did. I called in sick. The bell rang anyway. I stayed home. Someone else did it. I watched from the fence one morning as a man I'd never seen before performed the motions perfectly, whispering the words I thought were mine. "I'm here. That's enough for today." I quit my job, left town, moved 3 states away. It didn't matter. Last week, walking through a city park at dusk, I heard it. A bell. Not loud, not close, but familiar. I watched strangers gather around an old iron post, taking turns pulling a rope, nodding, stepping back just so. None of them looked afraid. None of them looked confused. The routine continues. It always will. I used to think cemeteries were the most honest places in the world. Everyone there stayed exactly where they were put. Nothing pretended to be alive. Nothing lied. That belief came from my husband, Mark. Mark was a groundskeeper at Hawthorne Cemetery, the kind of place people described as peaceful, because they didn't stay long enough to hear it breathe at night. We met when I was cataloging burial records for the county, temporary work that turned permanent because Mark kept bringing me coffee and pointing out mistakes I hadn't made yet. He had a soft voice, a patient way of moving, and hands that smelled faintly of soil no matter how much he washed them. Our life was quiet and predictable. We lived in a small house bordering the cemetery fence, close enough that headstones peeked through the trees like pale teeth. Mark worked early mornings and late afternoons. I worked from home, transcribing old death certificates, listening to the wind knock against mausoleum doors. Evenings were dinner, old movies, Mark telling me which graves had sunk that day and why. There was comfort in routine, especially with death always nearby. It made everything else feel earned. The first thing that changed was so small, I didn't even write it down. Mark stopped locking the back gate. He was obsessive about that gate. It separated the public paths from the older sections, unmarked graves, family plots that predated maps, ground that shifted if you stood too long. He used to check the lock twice before coming inside, sometimes 3 times if the fog was heavy. One night, after dinner, I noticed the key still hanging on its hook. "You forget something?" I asked. Mark looked at me like he didn't understand the question. Then he smiled, too quickly, and said, "It's fine. No one uses it anymore." I told myself people change. Habits loosen. Love isn't static. The next thing was his shoes. Mark always left his boots outside. Cemetery rule. Soil, mold, whatever else clung to them didn't belong indoors. One morning I woke up and nearly tripped over them by the door. They were clean, scrubbed down to the leather, laces neatly tucked in. When I mentioned it, he frowned. "I've always brought them in." "No," I said, laughing to keep it light. You hate that. He watched me for a moment, eyes searching my face like he was reading something written there. Then he shrugged. Wes, I changed my mind. I remember feeling embarrassed, like I'd accused him of something unreasonable. I apologized. That became a pattern. Mark started touching things that were mine, personal items he'd never shown interest in before. My grandmother's ring appeared on his nightstand one morning. My old college scarf, the one I wore when I needed comfort, was folded carefully in his drawer. He'd hum tunes I didn't recognize while sorting through my journals, saying he liked the sound of my handwriting. The way he said handwriting made my skin prickle. There were physical things too, things I couldn't explain away as memory or mood. A scar appeared on his left wrist, thin and pale, like it had been there for years. Mark had always been meticulous about injuries. I knew every mark on his body. This one wasn't new, but it wasn't old either. It sat there wrong, like a copied detail added late. When I asked him about it, he pulled his sleeve down. Always been there, he said gently, like he was correcting a child. I started noticing his writing. Notes left on the fridge, labels on boxes in the shed. The letters leaned differently, too precise, as if someone had practiced Mark's handwriting rather than lived with it. When I compared them to older notes, my stomach tightened. The differences were subtle, but they were there, enough to feel intentional. I didn't tell anyone at first. I didn't want to be the woman who thought her husband had been replaced by something else. So I tested myself instead. I reread old emails, watched videos of us on my phone, studied photos like forensic evidence. Mark's smile in the photos was crooked. The man in my kitchen smiled evenly. I asked his coworkers if they'd noticed anything. They laughed, told me cemetery work-aged people changed them. One of them joked that maybe Mark had finally let the dead rub off on him. They all agreed he was the same as ever. Better even, more focused, more efficient. When I pressed, they exchanged looks. One of them asked if I'd been sleeping enough. I stopped bringing it up. The gaslighting wasn't loud. It was soft and reasonable and constant. My sister said marriage changes people. Our neighbor said grief was contagious in places like Hawthorne. Even my own notes betrayed me. Entries where I'd written things Mark now claimed to remember differently, dates that no longer lined up. One night, unable to sleep, I went into the attic and pulled down the old camcorder. Mark and I used to record everything. Birthdays, anniversaries, stupid moments we thought we'd forget. I set it up in the living room and played tapes until dawn. On one tape, Mark is explaining the cemetery to me for the first time. He talks about listening posts, about how the ground sometimes answers back, if you're patient. He laughs at his own joke. His voice is softer, warmer. I pause the tape and listen to Mark breathing beside me on the couch. It didn't match. The next morning I confronted him. Camcorder still running, my hands shaking so badly the frame wobbled. "You're not him," I said. "Something happened in the cemetery." He watched the tape play, his face unreadable. When he turned to me, his eyes were kind. That was the worst part. "I'm still Mark," he said. "I just stayed." I asked him where my husband was. He hesitated. "Just long enough." "Mark went where everyone here eventually goes," he said. He didn't come back. The room felt suddenly hollow, like sound had learned a new way to disappear. I demanded details. How? When? Why? He shook his head. "Knowing the process doesn't help," he said. "It only makes it harder to keep shape." That word, shape, echoed. He told me Mark had wanted this, that the cemetery offers continuations to those who tend it long enough, that some people leave pieces behind and others leave everything. He said he was doing a good job, that he was learning every day. "Do you love me?" I asked. He smiled, that even smile. "I know how." That night I found Mark's old jacket in the closet. The pockets were full of dirt, damp and smelling wrong, like it had been taken from deep below. Inside was his real notebook, the one he carried everywhere. The last entry was unfinished, the handwriting frantic. Something noticed me. I screamed until my throat tore. By morning, the jacket was gone. The notebook too. Mark, what wore Mark, made breakfast and asked if I'd slept better. I tried to leave. My keys were gone. My phone showed no service, no contacts. Even the fence gate was locked from the outside. Over days, then weeks, he became more Mark than Mark ever was. He remembered stories I'd forgotten, anticipated my needs. He touched me with practiced intimacy, learned my rhythms, my fears. The house filled with my things in places that felt almost right. People visited. They hugged him. They told me how lucky I was. Sometimes at night I hear movement beyond the fence. Soil shifting. Footsteps learning weight. Mark listens too, head tilted, smiling softly. "You'll be okay?" he tells me. "You belong here now." This morning I found dirt under my fingernails. I don't remember digging, but the cemetery does.